Hello, I'm Glenn W. Hunter, and with me today we have Joyce Clarke, Shor, Denny, and Tamika Carter. We're here with TIPS, i.e., Trauma Informed Prevention Services of the Inland Empire. Today's topic is racism as a mental health crisis. There's been movement, there's been a declaration, it's a thing now. And that's why we brought our experts here to really try and unpack what that means with regards to race relations in our community. So let's just get started. Now that we have this proclamation, how do we define racism and how do we define a mental health crisis?
I would like to share a definition in brief, which was kind of postulated by a PhD, Dr. Kamara Jones, during a conference. And this was recent. And going back to some of the prior definitions of racism, she kind of just brought it into 21st century or modern terms. And she said racism is a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on race. You wind up with unfair disadvantages for some and benefits for others. And she finally says, but it saps the strength of the whole society through the waste of human resources. So it's privileges for some, benefits for others, but it's a system of structuring these opportunities and assigning value based on race.
I think that gives us the opportunity to look at it from a macro point of view, especially as you start talking about the value that's being associated with it. But does that really define us from a micro point of view as well? Or is there another perspective that maybe we can explore?
You can look at where we see it manifested more than anything. We see it manifested in housing, health, which is what we're really talking about today, mental health, physical health, education, jobs, social norms, how the white population is taught to fear Blacks wherever they see them, whether they have a three-piece suit on or a hoodie. And more than anything, which has been for decades, is this school to prison pipeline. That's macro and micro. And we see that more than anything of how they want to make sure our young people, starting from kindergarten, are put into this pipeline so they can go straight to prison and never be of any value to society, to Black society.
Well, isn't that called systematic oppression?
That's another good word for it, that school to prison pipeline, yes.
Like all of everything that you said, right? It all plays in together when you're talking about the layers of racism that we're facing in this country, because it is all of that. It's where do you live with the redistricting or redlining, right? It's access to healthcare, access to mental health care. It's all of those. So when you're talking about racism being a mental health issue, we're really trying to say how all of those layers of systematic racism have impacted a group of people mentally, and how negatively that is, and how can that be measured, I think is what we're trying to look at now. How, we have a lot of different measurements. How can it be measured? And I think maybe the other part of this is how can we measure change? I think that's the kind of things that we're looking at now with our society and trying to talk about racism as a mental health issue. To me, the whole point is now the highlight is on it, funding can go to it, and now we can start dealing with it in more of a national health awareness mode rather than looking at it as a class or, looking at different social aspects of it. What do you guys think?
I think when kind of talking about racism as on a micro level, as a mental health crisis, we're looking at racism impacting both the giver and the receiver of it. And so we're thinking about the mindset, narcissism, or those types of things that could be associated with racist personalities. and that is just basically that hatred and anger, fear and phobias. And we're also talking about the impacts that are happening to those who racism is enacted upon. So the depression, the resulting feelings of bipolar mania, and other things that a lot of times are complicated and misdiagnosed as, psychopathology, when you're dealing with someone or possibly a patient or a friend or a family member who is actually just having resulting feelings of racism and oppression impacting them.
Hello, everybody. I hear a little echo, but I hope it's okay. I went to the doctor yesterday, and I get my yearly checkup. I get my blood drawn, and my doctor was telling me that she was concerned that my white blood cell count was kind of low. And I'm freaking out to hear that. Like, oh, what's going on? What kind of thing? I'm clear for everything, but she tells me she wants to get me tested. So she sends me to a lab, sends me to another doctor. And I had another doctor who's a male. I'm not sure exactly his origin, but he tells me African Americans, in a lot of cases, we generally have a lower white blood cell count than the majority white people. So I'm freaking out, thinking I got some kind of whatever immune deficiency, something like that. He's like, no, this is just, the standard is the majority. The standard is white. And so the effect on me mentally, the effect on me physically of the tension, the stress, the worrying, because of my standard is being held to that of white majority. And I think that is systemic oppression, systemic racism, and the bones and the structure of our country. And to start to see that those institutions are being attacked by people coming together and calling them out and saying, hey, this is a problem that, as you just said, African Americans are lowest on the pole of all these institutions, from health and education and all these things. So I agree. When we start to quantify them, we have to look at the numbers, we have to look at the mental, we have to look at the physical reactions on how the effect is on the people. And as we start to move forward, it is a huge sense of accountability, a huge sense of education of these are the systems that we are in, and what can we do about them to create a sense of equality and equity within the system, because it could be anything, but just to acknowledge the differences in the people and still hold them as equitable is a huge attack on the system and all, because we all know, 3/5 of the human being, equity and equality is not something that helps to foster the current system as it is in right now. And then you can even just take a look at our current presidential election. We have the first female, first African American vice president, and there's all that being brought up with that. So I feel like we are at a point of change. We are at a point of growth, and to qualify that and to quantify that is going to be important for the generations to come. And how we do that, I think we do have to assess the mental health, the physical health, and not just in the forms that we currently have, where we're talking about Freudian psychology and we're talking about how people respond to these tests that are developed by the majority, but
Black DSM.
Right.
It's time for the Black DSM, because we know that most of these things were developed in like the 1930s, and with populations that didn't look like, act like, or feel like us. Right. And I love that you brought up the vice president pick, because that's a big one now. As we're talking on a micro level, we have to talk about Black women's mental health issues. Even our former first lady expressed that she had low-grade depression. Mm-hmm. And, there were a lot of reactions to that, and a lot of them negative, and even more negative because she actually named some of the structural issues going on in this country being attributing to her depression. And I mean, that's what sits in my office. That's what's in my office is Black women who have to work through some of the things that they've gone through at work, some of the pains they've had to swallow, the microaggressions they wish they had shed something to. And that's a crisis, and that's something that people are carrying. And if you're looking at, people, hundreds of people in the community or thousands of people in the community carrying that type of hostility or anger or aggression or those feelings, that's a crisis. And it's even more a crisis because, as you guys have stated, the systems that are built to deal with mental health or even or physical health are not equipped to deal with Black women or Black people as a whole. There are so many discrepancies in the training of clinical people, of educators as well, where they're just not getting what they need to identify and assess what's going on with us, whether it's academically, psychologically, or medically. And even still, in assessing it, a big part of assessing is then communicating your assessment results to your patient. And so, just like James is talking about, that was not communicated quite well to you to, off top, to say, hey, yeah, you fall here, but for brown people, for melanated people, that's actually normal range. And so now we've got, you're going through your own little crisis, your own little traumatic moment of, questioning whatever. And that's a lot for someone to be carrying. And it's a lot for, like I said, just an entire community, or even 50% or 25% of a community to be carrying that in and of itself is a public health crisis.
True. And I definitely like how you pointed out that to get that information out there on an equitable level, where these are where people are, if you come from this region, and that brought in my history, African people from the African diaspora, we have blood that is different for a reason. And let's look at the beautiful, why we have it for a reason. And could you please break down the acronym for DSM, because this is a family show and I don't want anybody to get
DS Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. We are on number 5. We just transitioned to that bad boy a few years ago. I was trained on the 4TR. That is the 4th, I guess, edition in its revision. So forgive me if some of my names and my codes don't match up.
What I'd like to talk about and bring forth is there's been a change that has happened, and it is more in the prevention world right now, where we're talking about adverse childhood experiences and trauma-informed care. These have been some new words within the last 5 years that have come into play that actually relate to the experience of Blacks in America, where we talk about looking at a scale of 1 to 10, and if these many things have happened to you, then being able to say that you are probable to have these types of physical illness or these types of mental illness, I think is a real big indicator to the stress and the strife that people of color deal with in America. American Psychological Association stated that being born African American is a high risk issue, and basically it's 1/8 simply being born brown in America. So when you look at the fact that just being here, just being born here, knowing that we're going to deal with those, like you said, those microaggressions on a daily basis, all of us on this broadcast, daily deal with different ways that we're reminded of our color, be it from a different race or from our own. I think that's something that we need to talk about too, is the racism within our culture against us, right? You got the light against the darks against the lights, and look how that is also part of this mental health crisis, how we have turned on each other. Do you guys agree that, through this systematic change that they now call genetic, generational suppression is now called genetic, disorders? When I was diagnosed, and then I'll stop. When I was diagnosed with my anxiety panic disorder, they said that I had a higher chance of getting it because of the genetics, because my mother had a disorder and my grandmother had a disorder, knowing that going back generations, they said that now I had a higher chance because of that. I see that more as the effects of, the trauma of the generation before me. In you guys' professional history or experience, what do you think of that dynamic? Is it genetics? Is it generational? Is it both?
I think you're talking, yeah.
Go ahead, James.
Definitely nature and nurture.
Mm-hmm.
All of the above. I was just talking about it. A woman, when she is in her environment, if it's stressful, she's pumping those stress hormones into her fetus, into the baby. So the baby is born into a world of stress, already containing a lot of the genetic codes to operate under stress. And then when she comes into this world, hey, here are different stresses that trigger her from different angles. And I like how you talk about what the ACE is considering what the stresses of being African American, Black, Brown in this system operates, and how it affects us, how racism affects us on a mental, on a cognitive, on an emotional, on a physical level. And you were talking about how in these systems, when we're looking for different indicators, we're looking for different things to identify what's going on with us as a people, what's going on with Black and Brown people. I think we're going to see it even more when people really pay attention and focus on it. The data is there. The quantitative information is there. But when they focus on it as, okay, this is a problem, not as in, okay, this is just a part of the system. For this system to operate, we have to keep these people in this way, in this sense of operation. And that is a huge threat to the system that we've been working with for the last, 200, how many years, 2,000 years that we've been operating in. So when we are ready to take a look at those numbers, I feel like real change can happen with racism.
Well, there's always been, since the beginning of time, the haves and the have-nots. This, what we've been living in America since the founding fathers, thank you to the musical Hamilton, is just so intentional to make sure that there is always an oppressed people. And it fell upon the now called Black or African American population. And it is just so systemic that it's, even when Shor said, it even bleeds into being born a statistic, being born with a handicap. And you three as clinicians, you see that all the time. And to me, you have no real concrete answers because you're part of the very system that wants to, I don't want to say oppress, but wants to keep you out of being a part of the solution. I look at it as every Black person, African American, colored, whatever you want to call them, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. We have seen stuff. We can go back generations where our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents just sucked this stuff up and never talked about it because it was so horrendous. And when we read about it and we say, why didn't we know this? Because it was just so, it was just so debilitating to be in a situation where you are hated for the color of your skin and nothing else. You have no value, none. You are automatically identified as having no value and no place. We all can't be like Marcus Garvey and have the Back to Africa movement because they don't want us with our American ways. So we just have to, through love in many forms, begin to change this society because white people are not going to do it because they don't want to lose what they have.
We were called Black Gold in the 1700s and 1800s, Black Gold. Mm-hmm. They were the most profitable, most valuable thing that was in America, and we still are. That's why we had a war, because they didn't want to let their Black gold go.
Amen.
We have built this country. We have done a lot. So when you say that worthless, we're nothing worthless, that's what they want us to think. But when you look at the reality, we are one of the most valuable things that has been in America. And still are, with the innovations and the brilliant minds of African Americans, our innovations and the things that we've done and created in America to make it what it is today. It's a shame that our kids don't feel the value that we have contributed to this country.
And as you said, Ms. Joyce, talking about the have and the have-nots, even I remember as a kid, my grandma, she lived on 103rd and Figueroa in Los Angeles. And it was pimps, prostitutes, drug addicts, gangbangers, junkies, dope dealers, all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't a real sense of the have and have not. It was a sense of, you don't have this, so I got this for you, and you got this. It was a gentleman who didn't have no money or whatever, probably was on drugs, but my grandma would let him come in and do some work around the house. Or he put this together, put that. It was just operating in a different system. And that really helps me to understand that the people in the powers to be, they don't hate me because of my color. They hate me because of my threat to their system. Because we were built on the system of color. The color was established and created. Racism is a fictionalized social structure. It's real, but it was created so it can establish a sense of wealth for those of the who claim to be have-nots, who claim that there's always somebody who has to be in that position. So as I understand, it's not about my skin color. It's not about me, where I'm from in diaspora. It's about me retaining my humanity. And so that speaks to your point about love and connecting back through love. And I'm not trying to get all mushy and woo-woo because, you know, I'm still down for the people and everything. But
no, but what I was going to say, what you speak to is a kinship, our kinship units.
Right.
And it is a challenge to the system. You know, someone was talking to me today about the ways that COVID is affecting different people. It's like shooting rays in different directions, and it's hitting people who are possibly maybe were privileged in one way, but now that privilege actually has flipped it to where that type of job is non-essential. And so, but what we're seeing is that, you know, a lot of people of color are doing all right in terms of, I can go stay with my cousin, you know, or I can go stay with somebody who, I mean, I've worked with people who were raised by their daddy's ex-girlfriend's people, you know, and so, but that kinship there, and they got them to school, and they supported them through, and they put the name on the paper and nobody ever knew. And so we have that. We've always had that. That's part of our ancestry, and they can't take that. And the more that we do the work of healing, that is through therapy, that is through reflection, as you sit at home with COVID. I've seen a rise in people reaching out to old offenders and saying, hey, you know, I got to talk to you. And so as we do that work, as you make the Black Lives Matter that way by, you know, I joke, if Black Lives Matter, pay your child support. If Black Lives Matter, call your estranged auntie. So as we do those things and we strengthen what has always been in us and always has been us and got us through the centuries, then we're going to be able to come out of this. And I think we'll be able to beat racism. I think those who choose to continue to engage in it and choose to push it, I think they'll be phased out. I mean, and I ain't no fortune teller, but I think that we have the power when we are acquiring the allies from other nationalities to see this as a human rights and a public health issue. And so as we do that, as we as clinicians and as practitioners in the field begin to create our own work, you know, there's a lot of work being done in education right now in terms of equity. Psychology is seeing that. I mean, I saw a mass exodus from a particular site because Trump backed it. And so I won't say that site, but there was a mass exodus of Black women, Black therapists from that referral site. And so there are a lot of things going on a lot of fronts. There are a lot of scholars connecting from across the country. There is so much movement that it is beautiful. And I think from that, we will generate our own diagnoses. We will generate our ways to educate our youth. We will generate our own ways to treat. I train in the treatment of Black women. I do a training called Towards Informed Treatment of Black Women. I also do one for youth called Educational Psychology of Black Girls. And that's for educators and as well as practitioners to understand the unique attributes of Black girls and women and how you need to alter maybe your EMDR EMDR is a practice, it's a type of therapy, or alter your CBT. You know, everybody throws CBT out there. How can you use existentialism, cognitive behavioral therapy, and can you flip them, and do you know when to do so? And when you're treating a woman, that's what's going to get us through. Us is going to get us through.
I also an awareness of the mental health and wellness is going to get us through. When we start maintaining our health, our mental health through breathing and meditation, mindfulness, I think within our culture, these need to be increased. How many of us use these skills? and techniques so that we can better control ourselves, right? Different reactions that we have, we need to start breathing and thinking about what our plan is, how we're going to move forward, start strategizing. I think would be something that we can do within our culture, within our own households. You know, you're having arguments in your household. We know that there's a lot of mental stress going on right now. How about everyone go to their corner and breathe, right? How about us come back out and have a family activity that we can do together and start changing the dynamic of what we did before we knew this, right? Now that we know that we are activists, we know that we have all of these things that can potentially happen to us, and we know each and every one of us what's going on in our households and some of our families' households that could be very distressing. How we can change those dynamics for our families, I think is very, very important when we realize that racism is a mental health issue, because we can look at our own families and see the strain and the stress. And now instead of saying, buck up, you know this is the struggle, now we can look at each other and say, I see your pain, do you see mine? And we can grow and build and work together, I think, a little more closely. Joyce?
Oh, my turn, okay.
Absolutely.
If you would love to hear your comments, your questions, your insight, connect with us by phone 951-282-7173 or via email tips@inlandempirecal@gmail.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.